We often hear it said that good things take time, that something cannot be rushed if you want it to be perfect. I feel this applies quite nicely to the topic this set of videos will cover, the long-awaited third installment to the Walten files, Bunnyfarm. Of course, Bunnyfarm has been long awaited for a number of very good reasons. Relocate Project, the second Walten files video, came out 9 months ago as of writing this script. A major element of the visuals required some different methods to be used to get them, and by that I mean the game parts. The fact that the video is nearly an hour long, and the great tragic loss of Christmas Eve 2020, in which Martin's computer encountered some issues and a section of the video's assets were lost as a result. But it was not rushed, and the result was another great installment that filled in a great many pieces of the puzzle, mostly around one particular character who we'd so far learned very little about. So, let us finally talk about this video. As always, I ask you to watch the video and the hidden one that goes with it first. I'll be talking about both, and that means spoilers. If you've not seen it, please go do so now. I also ask that you maybe take a look at my previous talking about videos on the Walten files to understand where I am with my own theories on it. Also, Bunnyfarm is a VHS horror video, and this one in particular involves some very hard-hitting subjects. Be warned that it might be upsetting, and I'd always advise you to avoid such videos if you feel they will negatively affect you. I'm really not messing around this time. This one ends with a horrific story that could easily hit home for some. If child death and drunk driving are not things you're comfortable with, please don't go any further. This is also going to be another multiple part video, so once again, if you do not see something mentioned here, it might just be in another part. And, because I know someone will say it, I know the Grey Rabbit gets their name revealed in this video, but until we reach the part where they do, I will still be calling them a Buddy at times, so the script sounds less weird. I'll mostly refer to them as the Grey Rabbit though. And so, here we go at last, Bunnyfarm. The video opens up on a series of clips from the past two main videos. It starts with the introduction to the first video's very first clip, which then skips forward a bit to show the technical support text from that same clip, and then jumps to the introduction for the second video's first clip, which again jumped forward a few times showing more pieces of that same clip. The Bunny Smiles Inc. logo, Little Bond signing the Relocate Project document, and the cropped founder's image. For a second or two of the second clip of that video, Bunny's facial recognition tape. We then see a few seconds of the television advert that was teased at the start of commercial, and a little of the local 57 news report from the St. Juanas forest with the words "activity in a local forest" heard. We then see a few seconds of Bond's pristine 1974 form on a stage moving, as Sophie's image begins to fade in on the centre of the picture. As she fades in, a series of more images and clips flash by. Some of it we've seen in the past videos, but some of it is new. In order of first appearance we see from the previous videos, the white and red Bond's Burgers logo, the shot of Bond's Burgers that showed it was condemned after closing with a close-up of Boozoo over it from the performance shown in the very first clip. The photo of the two founders of Bunny Smiles Inc., the characters of Little Bond sat on a sofa and the television screen they are watching. Little Bond checking for the noise in the dark as the glitchy noise from Jack's missing poster is heard. The robotic Bond as he was when Brian was trying to test his functions out. The green screen with the information about the K9 bunker. Brian travelling down the road towards K9. Sophie's pill bottle. The home video. Jack's missing poster on the television screen. The lighter on the floor. The K9 bunker door as it was shot by Kevin, Hillary and Ashley. Brian's ID card. Kevin, Hillary and Ashley's shot footage of the broken animatronics of Bond, then Shah. Their sleeping bags. The back door's door. A shot of the Billy animatronic. One of the local 57 St. Juana shots we saw in this video earlier. However, in the midst of all the familiar are a few new things, which get added into the rotation always in the same order. A shot of Boozoo with a stage background, which makes me think this is pristine 1974 Boozoo, although Sophie's photo hides his face. A second or two of a video shot at a bar, which looks like it's in a high school or college party. A few seconds of pristine 1974 Shah moving as the camera moves towards her. Towards the end of this sequence we also get the same clips in the same audio repeated a few times at speed. Little Bond in the darkness, robotic bomb being checked by Brian, the back door's door, more of robotic bomb being tested, the robotic Billy, Brian's ID card, the lighter, the pill bottle, broken Bond and broken Shah being worked on for the Relocate project, the 3 sleeping bags, and then the new clips. Eventually it stops and the first half of a YouTube link flashes up at the bottom left of the screen. We'll need this later to find Bunnyfarm's hidden video, which we'll discuss properly later. Then under her photo fades in Sophie Walten, and then 22 years old, born 1960. Then another photo of another girl fades in, and we too get her name and age, Jenny Letterson, 26 years old, born 1956. Then we get the words, footage from October 15th, 1982. This immediately sets us into the year of 1982 and 5 days after Brian Stells went to K9 for his work shift and ended up being killed by Bon. We then get to hear a bit of music being played through some older speakers as the words of Bunny Smiles Games drop slowly onto the screen, landing and brightening up. The words Cyber Fun Tech 1982 appear under it and Billy to the right. This is one of the teased images we first saw in commercial. We then get to see an image of a yellow box that bears the cartoon faces of Bon, Shaw and Boozoo and bears the words Bunny Smiles Inc. Beta Tester Golden Ticket. The title screen for the game then appears, a Bon head on a black background and the words Bunnyfarm in a big red title. Underneath is Insert Coin and Bunny Smiles Games 1975 to 1982. The music is 8-bit and starts with a pattern that is the Morse code for SOS. We then hear a conversation between the two girls we were just introduced to. Jenny tells Sophie that this is the game she wanted Sophie to try, and that she's been playing it for a while now and thought Sophie might like it. We hear that the cabinet has been installed in the basement of the building, and Sophie is asked to be careful with it, as it is apparently quite expensive and delicate too. They start up the game and Sophie creates a save file, accidentally typoing her name in the process and discovering there's no option to delete or go back. So she ends up naming the save file Soapy as Jenny laughs at her teasingly, calling her a dumbass. The list of save file names we can see includes a few that we'd seen before in commercial. Jenny, Janitor, BSI Tester. We can now see that the ST-A one that I'd had trouble with before was indeed Starla, as quite a few commenters had suggested. There is also a file with a few numbers and what looks to be the name Chris. We see a black screen with the word recording in the top corner. Then the game starts up with a cartoon cutscene inside of the Bonsburgers restaurant, and we can already see Jack's photo on the wall, but it appears to be a normal photo, not distorted or creepy as we've seen him appear mostly in the past. Some vague white humanoid figures fade in before Bon wearing a straw hat appears in the foreground to call around the other members of the Showstoppers. As the white humanoids walk around behind him, he asks if the others remember what today is, and the footage briefly dips in and out before Banny responds that she knows. Bon asks if anyone else remembered, before allowing Banny to remind the others that today is the Fruit Festival and they always have a huge party. Boozoo and Shaw say that they forgot about it, but Shaw remarks that she hopes that this year's party will be better than the one last year. The cutscene cuts in and out again, and we see the line "I'm sure it will," but don't hear any voice lines to go with it. Bon then asks the others to put their fruit into the baskets, but the others reveal that they haven't brought any fruit for the party baskets. Bon calls the others dumb salamanders for forgetting the important stuff, and the cutscene during this cuts in and out again. We then see a Hippo character who overheard the conversation and informs the gang that he has a barn full of fruit. He offers to give them fruit if they come help him out with some small favours, and Banny immediately gets excited about the possibility of seeing all the animals. Bon tells the Hippo, Pete, that they'll do it, but his scene and voice get cut away from prematurely and go straight to the next part with Shaw, who comments that it will be fun to work together to save the festival, in between more cutting in and out. Then Billy suddenly appears and declares Billy, to which Banny responds, "What?" Pete then asks the cast to follow him and the scene ends. But before we leave the restaurant we see a black figure fading in from the staff door at the back, maybe the Shadow Man. The black screen with recording returns, and then there is a chime as we see a very fuzzy photo in the centre of screen with Pete and another horse character standing within the scene. Over the top are the words Pete the Hippo's Farm. We get a fun fact screen with Banny on it that tells us that she likes birds. Sophie comments to Jenny that she likes the artwork of the game, but that it seems familiar to her somehow. The game then loads in on the farm, Bon as the controllable character standing in front of a barn with Billy to his right and Pete to his left. Jenny then demonstrates the controls, moving around and interacting with Pete to make him say apples. Jenny tells Sophie that she was playing this game for a while some time back and has noticed a lot of stuff, then clarifies by saying that she feels the game is very unfinished. During this part, the Bon avatar is moved down low enough that we can see a long-eared grey character, possibly the grey rabbit who for now I'm still going to be calling Buddy in the script. The girls move Bon around the farm to explore and find other characters, while Sophie notes that the machine did say that the game was only a beta test, and Jenny continues to talk about how the errors, glitches and crashes she experienced while playing didn't seem normal and were freaky. She says that those glitches were why she wanted to show Sophie the game in the first place, as Sophie is apparently into weird, mysterious things like that. During this time, they read the plaque under the statue of the founder of the farm. Bobby the Hippo was the original owner of the town. He had two sons, Pete the Hippo and Johnny the Hippo. Bobby made the promise of creating the best quality barn in the world. R.I.P. Bobby. Older year, other year. Sophie feels another twinge of remembrance upon hearing the name of Bunny Smiles Inc. Jenny says that the company had been pretty newsworthy recently, then goes on to talk about how recently an employee of BSI, Brian, had gone missing on what was rumoured to be his first day. Sophie finds it strange that he could just vanish, as Brighton isn't a very big town. Jenny then repeats what she calls an urban legend regarding another BSI employee, Ashley, who had gone missing a few years back, and how it's rumoured that she's still down in the company's bunker. Again, during this part while wandering around, it's possible to catch sight of another one of the mysterious characters from the series lore, lurking just out of sight, the White Bear. Sophie decides that it just sounds like stories designed to keep kids out of the forest and suggests that they just continue to play the game. Jenny agrees, laughing that this isn't the sort of stuff to talk about while playing a child's game, but Sophie is quiet and obviously deep in thought about what she's just heard. Jenny asks her if she's okay, and Sophie quickly changes the topic to ask if she needs to go to a certain person. Jenny just tells her to approach each character for their minigame, and Sophie looks at Char before deciding to choose someone else as Char's game looks boring to her. She eventually chooses Billy's game, and the image of the outside of Bon's Burgers pops up with Billy on top and the chime standing again. We see another fun fact screen, but Char's cartoon self is squashed and the girls laugh a little at this sign of the game being broken. Sophie again voices that she feels like BSI and other things she's seeing here are things that she remembers, but she just doesn't quite remember from where or how. Jenny then tells Sophie that she unfortunately has to go, as she has an essay to finish, and leaves Sophie alone with the Bunnyfarm game cabinet. We return to the inside of Bon's Burgers, and Billy appears on screen, curiously asking Bon why he's there if he's supposed to be at the barn with the others. He then starts to tell the screen that he's trying to get preparations for the party completed with a slight hiccup in the voice audio, but that the things he needs are hidden behind puzzles. There are gaps in the dialogue where Billy vanishes off screen, almost as if these are the spots that Bon's own cartoon avatar should be appearing and replying, but instead we get no Bon and silent white noise in the gaps. Billy asks Bon if he could help him solve them, but partway through saying they need to get the party hats in the basement, Billy's dialogue is cut off and his avatar vanishes off screen. It returns but starts blinking off and on screen with small sound bites playing that sound like parts of its previous dialogue, before all of Billy's different avatar poses appear on screen at once, overlapping with each other with only white noise. Another small second of sound plays as all the Billys vanish off the screen. The background darkens, and on the left of the screen appears a Billy that looks a lot like the animatronic version inside of the canine back doors, only with a face that looks almost pained. Some more dialogue plays which sounds a little bit like Ashley, peaky and distorted as the mess of avatar poses returns to the screen, but pixelated and with a black space where Billy's face should be, as the scene and the animatronic Billy disappear a second before the avatar mess Billy does. The game then resumes with Bon inside a representation of the restaurant, Billy stood on stage and Sophie still controlling Bon. She moves Bon around, collecting presents that when collected give her vague images of the characters inside of the restaurant. First Char, then Bon, then finally the White Bear, which stutters on and off screen. She also tries the ways out of the room, finding the south door not to work, but going right sends Billy following her off screen, after which the game or recording skips ahead to picking up the second present instead in the room. At one point she also tries the staff door and Billy follows, only to get stuck within the door frame for a while before managing to clip beyond it into the dark space to the left and somehow pull the game and player into the next room with him. This seems to be an arcade/party room, and Billy says that the party hats are in the basement again. Sophie moves Bon around the room, glitching slightly and walking under objects in the level, which causes her to remark that the game is very broken. She eventually tries the double doors at the top, and the scene slowly fades out, except for a coin-operated ride shaped like a rocket ship which stays on screen, then blinks out. We then find ourselves in a room with a pink and black background of an image, a door in the top left corner, and a machine fitting in the centre. Billy stands next to it. Sophie wonders what to do, but quickly locates a yellow battery, which she then places inside of the machine, waking it up. The conveyor starts and dispenses a pen as the recording or game starts skipping forward and cutting chunks out, leaving black gaps. Sophie makes Bond pick up the pen, then proceeds to play a game of noughts and crosses on a grid on the front of the machine. She easily wins and Billy walks off screen, returning with another present. Upon picking it up, Sophie receives another picture, this time of the distorted grinning face of Ashley. Sophie seems a little freaked, then something that sounds like a music box starts playing as the game vanishes, leaving only the picture on screen. A sound like someone trying to talk over a badly tuned radio with poor signal plays, and Sophie calls out for Jenny. We'll then return to the cutscene of Bond's Burgers as a slightly distorted version of Billy's Happy Birthday song tape plays out, and the avatar mess Billy appears on screen with a pixelated version of Ashley's bloody face from the end of Relocate Project's 4th clip, where Billy's face should be, and where that black gap was the last time. The game returns outside to the farm, and we can see that Billy is gone from the farm, but the edges of the messed up Billy remain imposed over the screen as Sophie can be heard trying to calm herself down and walks around, eventually running into the grey rabbit, which makes the game hard crash with a worrying noise. Sophie can be heard still panicking a little before her own speech glitches at the end and falls silent. We then briefly see the words "footage from October 16th, 1982" appear on screen, but looming behind it seems to be 2 eyes and a muzzle with bucked teeth, 2 long ears on top. It seems to be the grey rabbit. However, this quickly vanishes and we go back to the Bunnyfarm title screen as Jenny asks Sophie what happened yesterday. Sophie explains that the game crashed but was showing her weird visuals, like it was trying to tell her something. Jenny jokingly asks if Sophie thinks the game is haunted, and Sophie responds, "I don't know, maybe?" But the footage cuts in and out as she says this. Jenny tells Sophie that she's gotten weird glitchy visuals too if she did certain things, but then asks Sophie if she really wants to play the game as it's very late. Sophie simply tells her that Jenny is free to go to bed if she wants to, and Jenny decides to do just that. The footage then skips ahead to Sophie choosing her save file, and after a slight pause and what sounds like a few clicks, the machine flashes slightly and pulls up an image of a 3D frowning bomb face with serious sounding 8-bit music behind it. But briefly before this we see the faded Buddy face we saw behind the date earlier, which becomes a much clearer image of the same face. The frowning bomb face has text placed over it that reads, "Oh no! There is a high chance bunnyfarm.ppx file data has been corrupted or its information has been altered/replaced by a third party. We recommend you unplug the machine immediately. Opening the file may lead to unknown glitches and errors in the levels. If you do want to continue, however, we warn you that the machine could suffer major changes and at its worst case a complete shutdown, deleting all valuable information in it. Do you still wish to continue?" Sophie asks herself if this means all her save data from yesterday is gone, as unknown error code 0722 appears at the top of the screen. Sophie swears that she's not going to enter the clown level again, and the footage once again cuts out, but before it does, the no option at the bottom of the screen changes into a pair of eyes, but reverts back to no after the footage returns. Sophie decides to re-enter the file because she wants to look deeper into the glitches. Immediately upon entering, she mutters that she expects to see glitches now because the file is corrupted, but so far things look pretty normal. Billy has even returned, standing where his game starts again, although originally upon loading his colours seem to be inverted, but that could just be the discoloration over that part of the screen. Reading the board next to him, Sophie finds what seems to be instructions or hints for the game, though there only seem to be 3 pages. The background behind the manual though is a forest coloured in red with what seems to be a figure standing there, and the game sprite of Bond in the bottom right corner. The footage cuts again and Sophie is back in the game, wandering over to the statue again and reading the plaque which flashes on screen for merely a second. Only, this time it reads much differently. He promised to take care of the 2 kids during the day. He told the parents everything was okay. It's sad that we can't really remember you, Sophie, but soon we'll be together, forever and ever. R.I.P. the 2 lovely red children. May 11th, 1962, May 2nd, 1974. August 22nd, 1965. May 2nd, 1974. Immediately, the mention of 2 lovely red children brings to mind these 2 red figures we saw teased at the end of footage. Now we know that these 2 are children, and they both died on the same day and likely together, maybe by the hand of someone who had promised their parents that they would take care of them. We also now know that they seem to know Sophie. Sophie wanders away from the statue, seemingly not having read it as it blinked past. She wanders until the footage cuts again and skips forward to her approaching Bunny's sprite, but just before it cuts away we see a blue character lurking in the tree line. A character that is the same blue as the Bon avatar Sophie is controlling, but this Bon has no hat and much larger eyes. Sophie approaches Bunny and selects her game, and we see a cartoon Bunny placed on top of a photo of a pigsty with the words Hippo House over it. Sophie dryly comments that those are pigs, seemingly reading the level title. A new cutscene begins with a barn background, Bunny appearing still enthusiastic about the farm. Then, the second character we saw on the screen for Pete's farm appears, a horse girl named Holly. Bunny thinks she's pretty and her face turns red. She asks if the two of them are there to help her feed the pigs, and Bon's character flickers on screen briefly to say yes, but only gets the first letter out before he vanishes off screen and the audio stops. Bunny appears on screen as she enthusiastically tells Holly how much she wants to take care of the pigs, and Holly asks that they follow her instructions. She tells them not to open the cages, but Bunny decides she's going to do just that after a few seconds pause. We then get a short scene of static pig models wandering inside of a house. We return to the barn and Holly says that all the pigs have now escaped into the Hippo House, and Bon calls Bunny a dumb bunny. However, behind them in the background we can now see a character there who isn't supposed to be, the broken animatronic Bon. Bunny sadly says that she was trying to help, and Holly says each pig is in a different room and they need to find the key to each door to open them. We then see a white figure in a farm hat wandering towards the barn, but as they appear something else appears next to them, a missing poster for Jack Walten. When this scene happens, Bon hiding in the trees disappears. We then get a game level inside the living room of the Hippo House as Sophie comments that she just has to catch the pigs. In the room are two hippo children standing around a table and another hippo asleep on a couch, while Holly and Bunny stand to the right of the room. There are also two pictures of hippos, one who appears to be Pete and the other who could be any of the hippos. On the table behind the couch we can see a pill bottle standing next to a lamp. This could be a nod to Sophie's own pill bottle we've seen before. Sophie explores the room for the keys, managing to clip slightly through the edges of the wall as she comments more on how the game is broken. She eventually sees the blue key under the couch and picks up and places down a bucket of chicken in front of the couch, which gets the sleeping hippo to move to it. She pushes away the seat and picks up the first key, headed to door 1 to unlock it. Inside she finds a dark room much wider than any house room and looking like a corridor in some sort of commercial or retail facility. She moves upwards and passes through a doorway into another door, but her avatar hits a black shadow in the shape of Bunny and she returns back to the living room area, which she is confused about. However, there are now subtle differences in the room. As expected, door 1 is now open and the couch is back where it originally was. However, both the hippo children have lost their eyes. The third hippo is nowhere to be seen. The red key is now blatantly sat out in the open. The pill bottle is gone, Holly and Bunny have moved, and the photo of Pete on the back wall has instead been replaced with Felix's half of the founder's photo. Also, while previously every other character on the screen had been moving in their idle animation before, only Holly is still moving, the other three completely still. Sophie moves to collect the red key, but shortly before she picks it up, Bunny's face changes from her happy, almost dreamy expression to one with half-lidded eyes and what looks to be an open mouth. Sophie moves to and unlocks door 3 and enters. Inside she finds the picture puzzle we'd seen in the teaser trailers for Bunnyfarm, with the pig also in the room on the other side of the conveyor belt. Sophie tries to cross it but is swept off to the side, so she goes to the puzzle to make the picture and solve it. As she does the puzzle, Sophie reflects that the unknown error from earlier seemed to be either trying to talk to her or get her to do something. And since it happened when she interacted with a character, she wonders if they've got something to do with it. She also reflects that she talks to herself a lot. When she matches the last piece of the puzzle, the room puzzle and characters vanish off screen and instead the screen shows Sophie a picture of Bunny's face staring eerily at her. There is a flash of the employee door at Bon's Burgers which then goes off screen and we see the name Susan Woodings appear on screen instead. An audio log then begins as we see the photo of a woman on screen. The voice identifies themselves as Susan and says that the audio log is the third, recorded on the day of June 30th, 1974. We discover that Susan worked in technical support at BSI and that she practically built all the animatronics. However, she noticed that today something was off with Bon's movements being stiff, especially in his right arm. Today was the day of Jeremy's birthday party, the first birthday party that we saw a photo of in Lucky You. She notes that this week has been weird, especially the opening of the place when one of the founders, Jack, had been missing now for a few weeks. At this time we see a photo of Jack and Susan talks about how Rosemary had come in to ask people if they'd seen him. Susan notes that Felix also seems worried and concerned. Susan then goes on to talk about how she felt that the first birthday party they'd held had gone pretty well, but that she needed to take Bond backstage just to check if everything was okay with the robot. During this part we see the shot of the employee's door again, and around the door on the wall are 3 images. At least one was a teaser image that Martin showed while Bunnyfarm was being worked on, and another is the whole founder's photo with both Jack and Felix in frame. She comments that she's currently the last person in the building, as Felix never showed up today and Chris has already gone home. She finishes by saying that she'll lock up when done, that it's not going to take long, but the picture goes darker and green and her last word stutters before the scene cuts. We then get what appears to be a gameplay-like level or scene of a character with Susan's face in the dark back room with the robots, and eerie silent ambient noise is the only music. The colour of the character that wears her face is the same darkish purple we've seen on the facility caretaker's uniform before. She wanders over to a desk at the top of the room. On it appears to be a naked endoskeleton from the waist up and Char's head. On the back wall is a photo of Felix's half of the founder's photo, and to Susan's right, just visible at the edge of the light surrounding her, is the hatless Bond we saw lurking in the farm before Sophie approached Bunny for her level. We also see Boozoo's head on a shelf above the desk, and when she moves further right, we just about see the robotic Bunny standing against the far right wall. Susan moves into the room and picks up a wrench from the floor, then approaches the hatless Bond. As she touches him, the background switches to an image of the animatronic Bond stood in what appears to be the back room of Bond's Burgers, judging by the cartoonish visuals of the characters on the wall. And while both Susan and the hatless Bond avatars remain on screen, Bond's face vanishes. There is a noise, the scene goes black, and then we get a still of Bond reaching towards the camera in black and white that flashes and flickers side to side as another discordant noise plays over it. We see Susan's photo, and then the eyes and mouth drop off the screen, leaving behind a trail of images. Things go black and quiet again. Then, with disturbing music, fades on screen one of the faces we've seen before, overlaid with Bunny's own in her facial recognition clip. The music continued, a song stuttering and jumping as first the face is darkened, then the eyeballs made bloodshot, then Bunny's head fades in over this new face with the bloodshot eyes filling in her own eye sockets. We get a few seconds of white noise silence and darkness, then the scene fades in on another gameplay style section in the same room, in which the player is now controlling the hatless Bond standing to the left. He moves to the centre and picks up another present, revealing on screen what seems to be a photo of Susan slumped over in a corner, with some text in the lower left corner. "I'm still alive, but I can't move, and I'm having trouble breathing, and my stomach feels weird." The image goes, leaving Bond with the present above him standing there in the room. He moves over to the right and gives the box to Bunny. It sinks in as she goes from standing still to moving as if breathing heavily, and her expression goes once again from her happy, almost dreamy expression to the one with the half-lidded eyes, and what we can see now is probably a straight-line frown. Distorted victory music plays and an image stretches across the screen from the top left corner, containing an image of little Bond. "Level completed! Great job, Soapy! You just made Susan beautiful!" This stays on screen for a few seconds. Then suddenly it cuts to a very close-up shot of Bunny's face with distorted music playing in the background. She has wide, staring eyes, and slowly the mask dissolves out and leaves only a humanoid face with the same staring eyes that was underneath. Sophie is then put back into the farm to move around, but more things have changed. Pete and Billy have both vanished from around the starting area, as has the notice board that he had been standing next to, and the mailbox that said Pete on it seems to have lost the name and changed positions. There seem to be fewer animals in the pen between the starting area and where Holly is standing too, and the big, dozing yellow creature that was underneath Holly has also vanished. The loose pigs that were wandering around have also vanished, and the game's music is noticeably lower than before. A bucket of water that stood next to the statue is gone, and where Benny's character once stood there is a missing poster on the building for Susan. As she passes the picnic table area, we can again see the grey rabbit wandering up behind a fence. During this time, Sophie's talking about how what she saw was confusing and scary, but knows that it seemed to have been telling her about an event. She then reflects on how the pills she's taking have made her forget parts of her childhood and teenage years, but says that she doesn't want to remember why she began taking them because it was for a reason. The recording skips a few seconds forward without a black part in between, then cuts out. We rejoin the recording, the game's background music completely gone now, as Sophie accesses the tips and instructions again. She flips through the 3 pages again until suddenly she is able to access another 4th page, something that seems to be handwritten on BSI branded paper. When this happens, the music stops, the red forest background turns to a black screen, and the Bond avatar walks off screen to the right, the sound of his walking the only thing that is now heard. This first page says Linda Crankin, do not touch, but Crankin has been scribbled out in red and Thompson has been written instead in the same red ink. Sophie turns and finds more pages, also on the same BSI branded paper, and also written by hand. The first 6 pages are completely blanked out with large dark bars over the words, but the 7th has most of the page uncovered and the subtitles, if turned on, fill in the rest. October 30th, 1964. Felix has been acting weird lately. He's been drinking more than usual. I am very worried about him. I don't know what to do. He came home at 4 AM. He was crying. He seemed unstable and stressed. I don't know what to do. Then there are 4 more blanked out pages, then one that is fully clear. August 23rd, 1965. I know I haven't talked here as much as I used to. This month has been so crazy. I moved in with Felix last week. He was very happy about it. Yesterday Jack and Rose had their 3rd child, a little girl. Her name is Molly Walten. Jack and Felix have been pitching up the restaurant idea with a company that's interested in the project. The name's Cyberfuntech. 2 more blank pages, then December 26th, 1970. Christmas was nice. They built a doll, a grey rabbit for Ed and Molly. Molly named it Rocket. Felix drank a lot yesterday. This has been a problem for a while. He's a good person, but he doesn't want to address this. It's getting worse and worse, but he doesn't notice. He feels bad about it, but doesn't try to change. January 3rd, 1973. It's getting worse. He's so submerged with their project, he doesn't realise how much damage he's doing to himself. How much damage he's doing to me. He keeps going places only to drink. Sometimes he even stays at the warehouse for the sole purpose of drinking. He doesn't listen. He never listens. I don't know what to do. Then 12 more blanked out pages are turned past in rapid succession until we reach a page which has the text a little blurry, and this one isn't subtitled. But screenshotting the image and shrinking it down to make the text not so stretched and blurred gave me. I don't know what to do. I'm so worried. Make it. I just cannot. Unfortunately, I can't make out the final word at the bottom. If you've any guesses, let me know. We then get 7 more rapidly past blanked out pages, and finally, May 2nd, 1974. Dear Felix, by the time you're reading this, I shouldn't be home. I know you're confused. I'm confused too. What you said to me last week hurt a lot, but it opened my eyes. Hopefully, this opens your eyes too. Our relationship isn't healthy. It never was. I'm leaving Brighton this morning. You're in the warehouse with Jack and the others as I'm writing this. By the time you're reading this, I'll already be in Hurricane. I know you were busy today doing Jack a favour. Something related to a school party, I can't remember. Please go there when you have the time. As for me, I'll try to build my own life while I still can. You should do that too. I love you. Goodbye, Linda. On this last page, written in red, are the words, I'm sorry, Linda. I'm so sorry. Sophie mutters that she probably shouldn't be reading this, and flips further, but there is only 1 more page of the BSI brand paper written on. The one after the last part of the letter in the same red ink. I am sorry. Eventually, it circles back around to the start of the tip/instructions, and the background, music and Bond avatar all return. Interestingly, the empty pages after the final written on page has the background of the paper get a little darker, though I'm not sure if that actually means anything. The footage cuts off again and rejoins Sophie back on the farm. This time Polly is also gone, and now she is gone we can see that the little building she was standing next to has a familiar looking image of 2 red figures next to a car upon it. The animals in the field above are also now completely missing. Sophie moves quickly down to where Boozoo is and selects his level, and we get an image of a cartoony Boozoo in his regular outfit, not the overalls he's currently wearing in the game, on top of a photo of a birthday party outside. The title of the level is Lily's Birthday, and the image flickers a few times before vanishing, and a cartoony Boozoo in his overalls appears briefly in the bottom left corner. The screen goes fully red after a few seconds, and Boozoo, in his normal outfit, appears in the centre of the screen. He tells them that he is setting up games for Lily's birthday party and asks if Bond will help him set up and test them. He finishes by asking, "What do you think?" but is cut off before the last word finishes. Boozoo vanishes off screen, and in the red background we see the vague shape of a human face. Boozoo then reappears, slightly closer to the screen than before, and comments that they should get started because it will be lots of fun. As he says this, the red background goes black, he vanishes once again, and on the left of the screen appears a stretched out human face. Some tinkly music plays in the tune of Happy Birthday, and the scene fades in on another gameplay style setting in the dark, with the hatless Bond in the centre of screen standing next to a few things including a giant birthday cake. He walks around to find a few things he could interact with, but chooses to interact with the humanoid figure on the far right. Doing so pulls up a dialogue box with the top of the human face we've already seen in this section twice, with what looks to be massive wide eyes. They try to speak, but the letters are jumbled and scattered about the text box, the only sound a repeating stutter. Sophie moves the hatless Bond away and wonders aloud what that was, before speculating that it again feels like she's being told a story. A story about a person who is a ghost, because all these tales seem to suggest that they're dead. She encounters another humanoid figure in the bottom right of the room which she doesn't engage with, then one in the bottom left, and another dialogue box with a wide-eyed face and jumbled letters scattered around it triggers with more stuttering. Both dialogue boxes seem to be the same, and with the letters there you could easily put them together to spell Sophie. She moves the Bond up to the top and finds another humanoid figure to the left, but moves away from it into the top middle of the room. The scene then fades out with some balloons to the left of the cake being the last things to go. There is suddenly a piece of piano music and the hatless Bond appears centre screen before jumping suddenly to the bottom right, where he stands with Bunnyfarm's Boozoo, who changes into a red figure with a human face as the music stops. Suddenly a cartoony Boozoo fills the screen from the waist up, the background first black, then red again as he calls people around for entertainment like you've never seen before he disappears. Just before it switches to the games, we get a split-second shot of this. I'm not entirely sure if this is Walten Files lore canon. We then get placed into a pair matching game with a grid of 12 cards arranged in a 4x3 pattern. Behind the game is a pixelated background of what looks to be a photo of a forest clearing, and to the side of the game stands a chibi-like cartoon Boozoo. Above the puzzle is the word memorize, then all the cards turn over for a few seconds before turning back round and the game begins with music playing. The pairs include one of each of the main 5 characters and an extra pair for Boozoo. Sophie quickly matches the Shah pair and then a triumphant musical cue plays and Boozoo changes pose and congratulates the player, Sophie. Sophie then doesn't match a pair and the music stops and Boozoo changes to a sad pose. She then matches the Billy pair and tries to match 2 Boozoos, but apparently each one needs to be matched with a specific other Boozoo to count, something she gets on the second attempt at Boozoo. There is a brief second of dark screen as Sophie continues, then she tries to match the other Boozoo pair, with the second card taking a few clicks to work, but Boozoo reacts as if she got it wrong. The footage skips a little again and we rejoin without the second pair of Boozoo cards matched. As Sophie moves the pointer around we hear a slight boing sound in the background, the same sound that plays whenever a card is revealed. Sophie attempts to match the second Boozoo pair again, but the second card she opens instead shows the wide-eyed human face. The little cartoony Boozoo hits his wrong answer pose, but the audio plays him saying congratulations and the Boozoo who we see from the waist up appears over the game. He tells the player that they're very good at this, as the game vanishes behind him leaving only black. But his audio skips and he quickly vanishes off screen to show instead an image of Boozoo gesturing towards a barn. Yet another image from commercial. He tells them that the real game is about to begin and says that it will be spot the difference and that this one is a bit hard. He continues, but only for the footage to cut to black and the game to begin. Boozoo has 2 lines, one for a difference spotted and one for a mistake, and it seems that they can overlap with each other. The first spot the difference picture is one you'd expect, Pete on his farm, but the next is Bond in the snow wearing a hat. Behind him in the difference image we can see a figure who has the same rough shape as the grinning cartoonish Jack we saw at the end of Relocate Project's first clip. Clicking that difference causes Boozoo to repeat his success line a few times, and the screen goes black with the 2 images disappearing, leaving the red difference circles on the screen. The next image shows Billy playing with some toys, but the difference image has some changes that seem significant. The toy figure in Billy's hand goes from blue to a solid black. Maybe the Shadow Man? The 2 little green figures on the floor also turn red and their smiles turn to frowns. Clicking upon the red figures causes that pair of images to leave the screen, and Boozoo only gets out the first word of his success line before being cut off. Then the next 2 images come up, first a photo of a man, then a photo of the same man but bloodied and broken and with missing eyes and a gaping mouth. Sophie clicks all over both images, but only gets the failure line over and over until the waist up Boozoo appears on screen only over the left hand side. The first image of the man is switched to the Bond image before things go black and all the visuals return to normal. The screen continues to flicker black though, and the second image is briefly replaced by the different Billy image before the broken animatronic Boozoo appears centre screen. He congratulates the player on completing his game as Boozoo's face is replaced by the unhurt photo of the man, and then says it's time for prizes as the animatronic vanishes and leaves only the face. The scene fades in on another gameplay screen, with the Bunnyfarm Boozoo avatar as the controllable one, but without his face. Above him is a table with a present upon it. The piano music plays again as Boozoo wanders forward, checking a table that's in the darkness to the left before heading to the present and picking it up. The piano cuts out and another piece of music, something that sounds more like it's being played on an organ, takes its place. The scene changes to a black screen with two white eyes peering out of the gloom. Eventually the rest of the face appears in around the eyes, a twisted distortion of the man we saw in the photo earlier. When this happens, the music stops and a voice begins to repeat,
"Missing 0714, missing 0714, missing 0714, missing 0714, missing."
The subtitles at this point say missing 071474. The scene cuts off and the face vanishes only to be replaced by Boozoo's face, mouth wide and eyes empty, seemingly covered in blood. We hear breathing, then silence, then what sounds like a gasp but it's cut off as the face flickers on and off screen. We then get a sequence of images. First, the broken animatronic Boozoo. Then Boozoo a step closer, his eyes and mouth replaced by reddened, bloody eyes and teeth and face streaked in red. Then Boozoo with the same eyes and teeth looming close to the screen, repeating over and over, "missing," as distorted music plays behind his madness mantra. Eventually Boozoo vanishes, leaving the eyes and teeth alone as the music skips like a stuck record. These two vanish and there is a lone bloop sound as the man's photo appears on screen again with his face blurred. Subtitles at this time say, "I can't remember my face." Sophie is placed back into the farm, the character at first facing backwards before turning. Now even more things are missing from the world, like the mailbox, flower pots and the chair from the starting region. The gate for the top field is open and the image of the car and red figures on the little building has now changed to one of the grey rabbit, who we now know is probably named Rocket from Linda's diary, peering out from the nose up. Further down, the sign that once sported a knife and fork now has the missing poster for the man we've just seen. We also get to see where all the flower pots probably went, and a familiar distorted broken face of a certain facility caretaker lurking behind a hay bale. The windmill has stopped moving. The tables and balloons down the yellow fence corridor where Boozoo had been are also gone, and towards where Bunny was there is now a missing poster for Susan on a tree. The world seems to be glitching out around the edge, and the employee door from Bond's Burgers is now on the Hippo House. Sophie talks to herself, realising that all these people she's hearing about, this game is making it seem like they all died. She realises that these were people she knew, but had forgotten about thanks to the pills blotting out parts of her past from her. She realises that digging deeper might not be a good idea, but curiosity is killing her, and so she ventures over to Shah to play her minigame. When selected, we get the level select chime, but it is cut off and we get a quick flash of what is assumedly the image that should have been centre screen to introduce Sophie to the level. The next scene is a forest with a red sky but no music, and Shah appears on screen in a cartoony form with no eyes. She muses that the place is beautiful, and then greets Bond, her cartoon self vanishing and reappearing on screen. When asked what he's doing there, we hear Bond's reply of just wanting to check up on Shah. At this point, Shah's cartoon self, which was off-screen, returns, but moves slightly to the left as the animatronic Bond appears just beyond the tree line. Shah says that she's finished her task as she once again vanishes off-screen, and we hear Bond's line suggesting that they play a game. Shah reappears centre screen and says that sounds fun, and asks what Bond wants to play. Bond suggests hide and seek as the animatronic Bond vanishes behind Shah. Shah likes the idea, but the walls of Bond's Burger's back room suddenly become overlaid over the scene with the central drawing of the corridor not being visible, and Shah vanishes again. She says she'll hide, and the forest scene vanishes, leaving only the walls, and there seems to be red on the wall splattered over the image of Bunny and something in the shadowy corner. We then see a countdown from 10, colourful and overlaid over a cartoony Shah that resembles a 3D version of the Shah that gave us the facility tour back in Relocate Project. The end of the countdown is signalled with a xylophone trill, although the first time it tries it cuts out and the game seemingly has to try again. The only other oddity about this countdown is that the switch from 4 to 3 is a touch quicker than any other switch. We then get a red screen with the word Seek on it and a cartoon star and a burger, which is a nod towards the popular fandom meme of Showbear. A rough map of the area then pops up, a road dividing it in two with a forest on top and 2 buildings below, one a pink house surrounded by flowers but still no music. On this map is a bonhead to represent the player, but also the white bear in the top left corner, and in the top right area 2 brown patches each marked with the letter E and M. Sophie first tries the forest and the scene switches to inside the forest, a photograph. Char is not there though, the game saying nothing to see here, so the game returns to the map screen. Now the bear is gone, there are 2 red figures standing over the brown patches, and the yellow flowers have changed to red roses. Sophie then tries the pink building, which when the scene changes to inside it seems to be a garden. The game once again tells Sophie nothing to see here, but that's not true. Looking towards the back of the garden we see a faint lurking shape, the broken animatronic Char. The image flickers before it disappears completely, and it seems when it comes back the animatronic Char is a tiny bit redder than she was before. Once again to the map screen, and now the roses have moved over to the other building, and the red figures are gone, replaced by Rocket the grey rabbit. Sophie tries the second building, discovering it to be a barn or at least a chicken coop. The background is another photo, but there are a few elements that stick out as basic pixel graphics laid on top. Mainly this thing here, which looks like a piece of paper that's been written on. Sophie searches around the screen until she spies a patch of white, which she clicks on. There is a triumphant musical chime, the word congratulations appears on screen, and we hear Char telling Bon that he found her. But when she appears on screen briefly, Char is in pieces, similar to the shot we saw of Rosemary's dismembered body. The scene then switches to outside, but instead of the eyeless cartoon Char appearing, the broken animatronic Char replaces her. She says that that was nice and suggests that the player hide now. We see the countdown from 10 appear again, but as it gets to the last few numbers, another piece of audio briefly overlays the countdown chimes, which ends in a sheep bar and a slightly darkened image of the 3D Char. We then get a red screen with an image of a cartoon Bon and Char together in the bottom right corner and the word HIDE on it. We return to the map screen and the roses have moved across the road to sit in front of the forest, and the Bon-faced cursor has become garbled. Sophie moves up towards the forest and selects it as the place to hide. The next screen is not the photo of the forest we saw earlier, but a dark place filled with drawn trees. There are a few seconds of white noise silence, and then a haunting and somewhat sad track begins to play. The animatronic Char appears amongst the trees and gradually moves closer and closer, stopping and asking, "Am I still beautiful to you, Sophie?" However, her voice starts to glitch and stutter at the end of Sophie's name, and there is a split-second cut after which Char's face has been replaced by an eerie stretched-out face. Then flickers again, so she changes pose to have her hand raised up, as if she'd been reaching to take off her mask, similarly to how we've witnessed robotic hands removing masks in prior videos. Sophie gasps and replies that she knows this person, and we hear "Found you" from the game. The scene changes to one with an image of the employee store at Bon's Burgers, offset to the bottom left corner with the rest of the screen red. As the audio plays farmyard noises, most often the sound of a sheep bleating, we see words on the screen that we've heard before. "I know where he is, Rosie. Follow me." The countdown timer then plays again, and after it the screen goes black briefly. Then the corner of the back room appears on screen again, fully clear, but the corner still in shadow as loud horrific music plays. The walls around the corner are suddenly covered in red splashes and a small image of Char is placed on screen, looking similar to but not exactly the same as the Char who gave us a facility tour. Her face has been replaced by a crying humanoid face, the mouth covered in a black bar. To her side is some text. "Hold up there, you can't enter this level yet, first you have to." But everything underneath this is covered by a black box. We hear a woman's screams mixed in with the distorted track, and if the subtitles are up, we see "Missing Rosemary Walten, last seen 07-19-1974. The scene then switches to the animatronic Char, slightly distorted and patchy, posed with her hands up near her face and her eyes a lot more human than usual, and she seems to almost be pleading to the screen. Her face is suddenly covered in blood and she begins to glitch and thrash slightly as the screaming gets louder, and the blood almost makes it seem like her face is now human as she suddenly goes completely red and the scene glitches out completely, going black. Sophie is freaked out by this and swears a few times before an image for each of the previous games appears in turn, flashing past a few times. Then, 2 long red figures appear on the screen to the right, and the Bunnyfarm start screen appears behind them to the left. Grayscale, title misaligned or sometimes partially missing, and a glitch on the Bond face that makes it appear like crying. This all eventually glitches out completely and the scene goes silent and dark. The game then fades in on a close-up of the well on the farm, one that's been passed by a number of times already, but never changed too drastically. There is an ominous ambient sound in the background, and the scene is dark as the eyes atop the well look around. Eventually they focus forward, and the ambient sound stops, as from the well rises the white bear, depicted as a distorted and stretched out version of the little cartoon we've seen in the past videos. As a side note, we don't get the name reveal of the character until the credits, but I'll be referring to them by name from now, Showbear. As they rise, another haunting track plays, sounding a bit more beautiful than the previous one we heard in the dark forest. Showbear then begins to speak, their words subtitled in the top of the screen.
Come one and come all, welcome to my magic fountain of memories. Step right up and enter your most repressed experiences and get ready to be amazed by my magic. Let's take a small trip down memory lane, shall we? Tell me, what is it you would like to remember?
However, that last passage has Showbear add the word small in between the words of A and trip, which isn't in the subtitles. The screen goes black, then pops up with a page of the BSI branded paper again, with some words on top. Funny mail page, write something nice for Bon. Sophie is controlling a pencil pointer and uses it to write in red, "Who are you?" The scene goes back to Showbear and the well, but they remain silent. We then go back to the paper and Sophie instead draws 2 red stick figures saying, "Here goes nothing." The footage cuts out a little, then we switch back to the well, which is now empty, and get a split-second glimpse of Showbear close to the camera before they disappear, and suddenly the audio glitches out and the entire scene goes red. We then see a photo of a house with 2 red figures standing on the front doorstep as sad music plays. Above this photo is the date 05/02/1974. And Sophie comments that she thinks that's her old house as the music begins to stop and start before finally stopping completely. We then go into a scene that might either be a dark house corridor or maybe a cornfield. It's kind of unclear and I apologise for that. Showbear can be seen lurking in the back of the shot. Suddenly, the grey rabbit appears on screen in a pixel art tuning form and speaks, thanking Bond for coming to help them clean something. I can't make it out entirely and I have a feeling that it's obvious. They vanish briefly, then come back to deliver their second bit of dialogue, but their character's been squished up to the side. They start saying their dialogue, but then it's drowned out by the sound of a ringing phone, and the scene underneath him switches to an image of a telephone on a desk before the grey rabbit also disappears. We hear the phone being picked up, and a date and time appears on screen. May 2nd, 1974, 15:23. We hear a conversation between 2 people, Jack Walten and Felix Kranken. The dialogue is subtitled. We hear Jack asking Felix for a favour, something which Felix seems reluctant to accept at first, but Jack convinces him to agree eventually. The favour is that Jack needs his 2 children, Ed and Molly, driven to and picked up from a school party that day. Jack is busy with paperwork and Rosemary is taking Sophie to the dentist. Jack calls Felix a lifesaver and says that the kids can be picked up to go at 5 and must be home at 9 when Rose is home. Sophie says that she remembers this conversation. Then we hear an ominous audio cue. The scene fades in on a gameplay section, with Sophie controlling the Bunnyfarm barn in the midst of a dark farm scene, with pumpkins, corn, the well, and some other farm things scattered around. Showbear's voice speaks and their words are subtitled on screen.
Be wary, for this memory seems to be buried deep within your mind. You must find them, Sophie.
Sophie says that she needs to take a breath, but moves around the screen. She passes a number of assets from the game and, interestingly, a white mask on a hay bale at one point. Sophie mutters that she now knows what's happening, that she does know all of the faces she's seen so far. She finds what looks to be a red animal, then suddenly Showbear appears with a present, which they eventually place on the ground between themselves and Bond before vanishing back into the darkness. Sophie makes Bond pick it up, and it turns out to be a flyer for a spring party at Brighton High, dated May 2nd, 1974. Showbear comes back after Sophie closes this image and follows her down a little way before lagging behind and disappearing. Sophie returns to where she entered this level, and eventually heard over the ominous sound is a distorted cry. Then two red figures enter from the right and begin to circle around the Bond avatar. The footage cuts, then shows Sophie following the red figures upwards as the ominous audio is replaced by a glitching one. The scene cuts out again, shows a few frames of Bond standing by a green notice board. Then it cuts again and rejoins as Sophie approaches a car at the top of the screen. Touching it changes the scene to a room with two beds in it, and the date of May 2nd, 1974, 17:20 PM. The two red figures appear on screen, one clearly a boy and the other a girl, and as they start to talk with each other, they slowly fade in into an actual boy and girl, Ed and Molly. Ed tells Molly to hurry up because Felix will be there any moment, but Molly is looking for Rocket. Sophie comments softly that these are Ed and Molly in a tone that suggests she can't believe what she's seeing. A tall figure appears behind the two children dressed in blue, assumedly Felix. Some red dialogue appears on screen, probably what he's saying, but it's hard to make out much other than it's saying something about needing to get going. Molly says that she has found Rocket now, and the grey rabbit appears next to her. The three humans vanish, but Rocket stays on screen a little longer, then the scene cuts to a photo of a car with the xylophone chime sound from the end of Char's hide-and-seek countdown sounding. We then see a very stuttery video of someone driving a car down a road in sunlight that's slightly waning, a pleasant evening sunshine. The footage has what sounds like a radio playing, but cuts off with a sudden noise. We then get dropped into another gameplay section, with Bunnyfarm Bond in what seems to be a school hall that is hosting a party. The caption that appears as the scene fades in tells us that this is the school, but also tells us that it is 21:37, past the time Felix was supposed to bring Ed and Molly home. Sophie wanders Bond to the side, but sees only a black humanoid figure that fades out when touched and appears when she moves away. Then Rocket appears and wanders around Bond before stopping to look at him and saying, "Follow," and walking off. Sophie makes Bond follow the other rabbit through the party, the distant sounds of people talking in an echoey room playing, as well as some music. In the room is a statue of a man and more black figures that fade out when walked into. Rocket reappears a few times, repeating "follow" once before moving off, and then "over here" twice. Bond reaches what seems to be a dead end, then finds they can move through or behind a wall. When they re-emerge, they are instead the two red children wandering through the party. They continue down and find Rocket in the corner, and touching him triggers another scene. The two red children stand there before becoming Ed and Molly, stood on the background of a school corridor. The audio cuts off and Rocket appears next to Molly. Ed asks if they can finally leave now they found the rabbit. Molly says that the school looks creepy at night and wonders where Felix is. Ed suggests that they go look for him. Ed then Molly disappear, leaving only Rocket, who goes red as the corridor also vanishes. We're then back in the party, with the two red children being walked through it looking for Felix. As they walk through, they go down a corridor that Bond bypassed earlier, and into an area filled with people, tables, and a bar. This is clearly an adults area. Eventually, the children walk to the right, and as they pass a certain point, we see the words "drinking zone" appear. It is here that they find Felix. Felix's face appears front and centre on screen as Showbear's slowed down voice says something. This, when sped up, is easier to understand and says,
Uncle Felix sure drank a lot that day.
The scene then shows Felix in the same blue clothes we saw appear behind the children earlier, stood at the bar. His eyes are small and dark, and the children ask him what he is doing there. They know that this is a drinking zone and he shouldn't be drinking, but the words go off screen and the scene goes black. Red words then appear on the screen. "It's okay, I'm really just feeling a little dizzy. It's getting very late, your parents must be worried, let's..." The rest of the dialogue is off screen again, but we can assume Felix said that it was time to go home. We get another photo of the car, this time with a disconcerting sting, and Showbear tells Sophie to watch. We then get another video of a car driving down the road, this time in darkness. The date and time that appears says it's May 2nd, 1974, 21:53, and a radio station plays. We then hear a conversation between the children and Felix with subtitles on the screen, Ed first asking how much longer it'll be till they get home, Felix saying that he thinks he's just kind of lost, then Molly innocently asking if Felix was drinking, to which Felix states again that he's just a bit dizzy and it's not a big deal. During this section, the road video goes black. Ed seems to sullenly accept Felix's words, and Molly says that she wants to go home. Felix says that they're almost there, and Ed observes that Felix is driving kind of fast. Felix says that he only wants to get them home quickly, and says he's sorry because he's not feeling good and wants to go to bed, during which the video again goes black. We hear Molly saying that it's alright, that today wasn't the best for Felix, but they understand and everything will be okay, to which Felix laughs and says thanks, but the subtitles instead read, "It's all your fault" from this point, and keeps repeating down the screen. The screen is now going black much more frequently though, and eventually we hear a load of car noises, the sound of Felix and Molly, and then some flashes of road and a brief point of view shot of the car possibly flipping. We then get a bad ending screen that switches amongst a load of images of red faces. Some of them scribbled, some of them bearing Ed and Molly's faces, and one 3D video of a red figure crying black tears. The tinkly music plays along with the sound of crying, some happy birthday and the chime that played whenever the player looked for Char in a place she wasn't hiding. The text on top first reads, "Oh no, you got the bad ending, you couldn't finish the bond tasks on time," but quickly switches to, "Oh no, you got the bad ending, you crashed the car, you killed them." We then see Felix's face, then the school corridor, before we get a red Felix face, crying and distraught as we hear what sounds like male screams of despair, then the car gets mixed in. This continues for a few more seconds until the text vanishes and Rocket's close-up face from earlier on when Sophie loaded the save file appears on screen with a red background and there is silence. The scene goes black and we see a photo of two mounds in a forest, Rocket sat between them looking a little worse for wear. Showbear fades in beside the scene on the right and then begins to speak.
They didn't go home that night. He buried them here. He was too scared. But they found a way out eventually.
Showbear disappears and we see two red children spirits appear on the mounds. The distorted crying heard again as they move towards Rocket begin to sink into them. And then the grey rabbit stands up as an unnerving audio cue plays and the forest begins to fade behind Rocket. We then have the scene cut off, hear a phone ringing again. We hear the loud beep of an answering machine, hear that there are 25 messages on the answer phone, then hear Jack speak. He's leaving a message for Felix, wondering what has happened. He needs Felix to pick up the phone now. Felix was supposed to bring them home hours ago and now Jack can't reach Felix. No one can reach Felix, and Jack needs to know if anything has happened. All he asked for was one simple favour and now Felix won't answer. What the hell is wrong with him? As this message is being left, we hear a music track playing that conveys franticness and another face fades in on the right of the screen, which appears to be Jack Walten's face. The scene and message are cut off by the answer phone tone again and the Showbear speaks again.
But that's not all, is it? There's still something you forgot to remember. They've been waiting for you.
However, Showbear does not say Sophie's name as the subtitles suggest. A piano-backed song starts and the scene fades in on a gameplay segment with Bunny, Boozoo and Char standing there in a light patch in the dark room, with their faces all dead eyes and mouths gaping wide. In the middle of them is a present surrounded by candles. The Bunnyfarm Bon avatar walks out of the dark, now faceless. Sophie makes them interact with each character one by one, getting a black and white image of each character as a result, with the first one cutting off the music. As the last one is cleared, the hatless Bon walks in from the darkness on the left, taller now than before. The two Bons move closer together, and interacting with him gives a shot of Bon mostly hidden in the dark, with eyes glowing and the edge of his teeth just visible. The animatronic Bon then appears on the screen in his full broken glory and the gameplay flickers out. Bon gets closer to the screen, then vanishes and a slightly stretched out image of his face in white but covered in red appears on screen as Daisy Bell plays in a slightly off-key way. This then cuts off and suddenly we get an animation of the animatronic Bon twitching, his hands over his face as if he might be trying to hide it or maybe take off his mask but can't. He's covered in red. Distorted glitched photos flash across the screen as he twitches, seeming to depict a boy and a girl, and eventually everything goes red. And then we see a scene of Rocket just sitting on a chair calmly. Behind him fade in two sad faces in the white background. A little bit of music plays, but eventually starts sounding like the end of an LP, skipping constantly. We then see a flash of the second half of the YouTube link needed to find the secret video. We then end with the credits, in which we're thanked for our patience in waiting for this video, and then for supporting Bunny Smiles Inc. The video ends on an orange screen that suggests that this was a Bunny Smiles Inc. distribution, a cyberfun tech company, 1974, which seems a very odd thing to include at the end of the video and makes me wonder if that's worth reading into or not. We now move on to Bunnyfarm's extra hidden video, Guilty. The first thing to note is that this video was actually uploaded onto Moss's channel back in mid-October of last year, which makes sense when you remember the pumpkin at the end of footage. A little more evidence that Bunnyfarm was really supposed to be out much sooner than it ended up releasing, but time pressures and computer issues put paid to that. The description of the video contains a written memorial to Ed and Molly Walten. Anyway, the actual video starts off with a starry background and a car musical track plays as a blue-lined version of a Bunny Smiles Inc. logo we've seen before in Relocate Project appears from the bottom of the screen, with a second of garble occurring along the way. The logo turns white, a blue cog appears behind it, and the words Bunny Smiles Inc. Archive appear to its left. Then, the picture gets garbled as if signal interference is causing the picture and audio to not come through correctly. We then get a title card. Company Greeting 04-15-1967. Just black text on a plain white rectangular background. It then fades, and a picture of a younger looking Felix appears in the centre of the screen. He introduces himself and starts addressing those who are watching, from the sounds of it, employees who have joined the Bunny Smiles company. As he talks, his picture fades out and another image fades in. A screen for the Bunny Smile company, with an image of a cartoon bonhead in a slightly different design and a burger and drink. This is an image we've seen appear before, in the very first Walten Files clip ever. Felix says that Bunny Smiles was looking forward to working with everyone and working together to achieve their dream. He also notes that right now the team and budget aren't really that big, but that he believes the hope they have is all that matters in making it work. The message then ends. We get a second title card, December message 12-10-1972. This one starts with an image of a Felix closer in age to the one we've seen a lot of so far, and his voice also sounds a touch more adult too. In this one, Felix is addressing all BSI employees and wishing them a Merry Christmas with their families. He talks about how far they've come and mentions the cyberfun tech deal and the Bonds Burgers project with images showing up for each topic. He then starts to talk about how he never thought that he would make it that far, but quickly changes the I to we when he catches it. He then states that everyone should be proud of themselves for how well things are going, and we end on an image of Boozoo in his pristine 1974 form. This message then ends. After a bit, the third title card pops up with a date of 05-02-1974, and the title censored by a giant black bar, but with a little effort it's possible to make out that the title is Guilty. If the subtitles are on, the words after the car crash also appear. After the title card goes, we have a pause of some seconds before the audio starts with the sound of traffic, and a slowed down version of Into Each Life Some Rain Must Fall starts playing. An image of Felix comes on screen, slightly distorted and battered, with blood running from his nose. We hear him sobbing slightly and coughing as he begins to talk. He talks about how he's messed up and how it's been a while since he used one of these. He talks about how he's driven before in the same conditions and messed up. He admits that he has a problem, something that's been a problem since he could remember, as we see a corner on a road. He talks about how when he's drunk he doesn't tend to remember things, so that is probably why he's in the habit of carrying a recorder around with him. He also says that he's recording all of this because come tomorrow he'll just think what happened was all a horrible nightmare, and he needs to remember what he did. He needs to remember that he crashed the car and killed Ed and Molly in the accident. When he talks about the children, the two red figures appear on screen, and it's clear from his voice that he's devastated at what he's just done. He cried as he admits to himself that they're not okay. He has no idea what he's going to tell Jack, and that he buried them. He admits that Jack's his best friend, and he didn't want his friend to see what happened to them. He didn't want to do that to his friend. But he panicked and buried them in the forest where they crashed, in St. Juana's. And now he can't even remember where that was, and that seems to distress him even further as a photo of a section of a forest appears on screen. He cries that he's so fucked and that the restaurant is going to open soon as the image of Bond's Burgers from outside appears on screen. He tries to reassure himself that he'll be fine, that it will all be fine. He then sobs to himself, distressed and fearful. The audio then cuts off and we see Rocket's damaged face up close, looking lazily at the screen. They'll slowly move back as a sad song plays, eventually crossfading between a close-up look to his full body, and we can see the places in which they are damaged now, in the clearest image we've yet gotten of Rocket. From the lyrics I've gotten that the song is named Home and was originally sung by Ruth Etting, although this seems to be a cover of it. They continue to slowly move back from the screen until they finally fade into the darkness. Then there seems to just be white noise silence until the video ends. Bunnyfarm is a long video for a reason. We learn an awful lot, and while we get bits of story for a great many characters, this video is focused mainly on delving more into Felix as a character, and the car crash incident which seems to have been the trigger point for everything that has come since, as well as being a video that seems to use the colour red as a link all the way through. So let's begin trying to order the information we now have, and to see what guesses we can now make. Firstly, let's get some dates sorted out. We now know that Charles and Susan are not the other two Walten children, but that those two children are very important for the story. We also discover that Sophie was the oldest of the three Walten siblings, being born in 1960, her brother Ed being born in 1962, and finally Molly, as the youngest, was born in 1965. This would mean that Sophie was 13 or 14 at the time of the accident, Ed 11 and Molly only 8. Because the birth dates we see on the plaque suggest that neither of the two younger siblings had yet had their birthdays that year, and we don't yet know what date Sophie was born. While we know from the information in the description of Lucky You that the idea for Bond's Burgers went back to 1958, from the messages in Guilty it seems like the company that would become BSI didn't get started until 1967, as Felix mentions that at the time of recording in April that the team they had right then was small, and the entire message just feels and sounds like the hopeful first message release of a new startup. We do however know that Jack and Felix were pitching the idea to Cyberfuntech as early as 1965 thanks to Linda's diary entries. This could mean that Bunny Smile started sometime between August 23rd, 1965 and April 15th, 1967, with a deal with Cyberfuntech either helping to start the company at the time or not being solidified until sometime between April 15th, 1967 and December 10th, 1972, which is when Felix mentions it. We do know that Bond's Burgers as a project was already in the works by that December message, and if the visuals we see of the coming soon poster containing Bond and Boozoo are anything to go by, it seems that at least two of the animatronics were either built, prototyped, or had been extensively planned by that date. We also get some exact dates on when the 5 characters who we know have become linked to the showstopper animatronics all died thanks to this video. Firstly, we already knew that no one had seen Jack since June 11th, 1974, and we all assume that is probably when he died. And Ashley of course died in July of 1978, probably either late at night on the 14th, or maybe early on the 15th, depending on what time she discovered and explored the back doors. Now though we learn that Susan was the second of the 5 to die, perishing the night of Bond's Burgers' first birthday party on June 30th, 1974. The man we can guess is probably Charles, although it's never actually confirmed in this video that this is Charles for sure, went missing on July 14th, 1974, making him the 3rd of the 5. Finally, Rosemary was indeed the final person to die while Bond's Burgers was open, just as I had previously theorised. Rosemary was lured backstage on July 19th, 1974, and was placed inside of Shaw. This means if Bond really is hosting Jack, that the order the animatronics had someone bound to them goes Bond, Bunny, Boozoo, Shaw, Billy. Interestingly, this order does correlate with the order of the names on the table list Ashley found in the back doors, besides Billy/Ashley of course. We also discover how long Bunnyfarm has been an idea or a thing. Although we knew from commercial that it had released in 1982 and had cabinets seen at the start of Shaw's facility tour, which was dated July 9th, 1978, the title screen for the game tells us that Bunnyfarm had been worked on since 1975. The same year that started with the animatronics being shipped to the canine facility, and tells us that it was very much a part of Felix's relocate project plan. Judging by Jenny's comments to Sophie, Bunnyfarm had already been out a few months at least before the footage of this video, so I'm guessing that Bunnyfarm released either early or mid 1982, and was not linked in any way with trying to divert people's attentions away from yet another missing facility caretaker in Brian. Interestingly, while the subtitles say that she'd been playing it some time ago, her actual dialogue says a few years ago. Finally, the majority of the footage takes place over 2 days, merely 5 and 6 days after the previous latest date we've seen in videos so far, if we don't count that we know that BSI vanished in 1983. October 16th, 1982 seems to mark the day that Sophie finally remembered what happened to her siblings, and also what happened to a group of people she had once known. With that said, let's talk a little more about the individual games we see being played and what they might tell us about how each person involved died. The first up is Ashley, and she seems to be an interesting case. While Billy's game is the first to be played, and therefore the least glitch which would hinder Ashley's ability to come through, Billy is the only one of the 5 main characters absent from the ending where the others bring Sophie to meet Bon. While this does reflect Billy's somewhat separate status as a character, it feels like Ashley's exclusion here is significant. It isn't until Billy's game is finished and Ashley is able to break through that the game crashes, which seems to put the rest of the game in its deteriorating state that allows the other people to start more forcefully telling Sophie their story. After this though, besides Billy not disappearing immediately, we don't hear much from Ashley again, probably because Sophie gives no indication at all that she specifically ever knew Ashley. It's possible that Ashley was the one to corrupt the game and break it because she was the most recently deceased, but this was all she was able to do to help. I also think that the focus on Billy's face is meant to hint back to that final shot of Relocate Project's last clip, where Billy's mask is removed to show Ashley's face. Next up we have Susan Woodings, an engineer who worked at BSI. We've already previously met Susan and learned something about her. She's bound to Banny, didn't die immediately, and possibly starved to death. However, this time around we learn the circumstances around her death. She was the last employee to leave the day of the restaurant's first birthday party, and decided to take Bon into the back room for repairs. Once there, Bon went for her and she ended up being attacked by him. The image of her slumped in the corner, what we see after the image is gone, and the text upon that image making it sound like he stabbed her in the chest and stomach. She says that her stomach feels funny, which might explain the rabbit is starving, and Susan also tells us in the image that she can't breathe, and noticeably Banny's movements after the present sinks into her look as if she's breathing very heavily, maybe even struggling to do so. As the hatless Bon carries the present that revealed the image over to Banny and it sinks into her before she starts moving, it's possible that the image is before Bon placed her inside of Banny, while she was still alive. Boozoo's minigame is reached at a point where the game is beginning to show the stresses of the glitches, and seemingly doesn't tell us a lot about the man who is now bound to him, who is assumed to be Charles from the tape list even though it isn't confirmed this is him. While we don't know for certain the name of the person bound to Boozoo, we can make an educated guess at Charles being the one because he was on that tape list with the others, and there is a Boozoo head we see in the back doors during Ashley's explorations which has Charles' name printed on it. So for now, we're going to operate under the assumption that it is Charles that was bound to Boozoo. The part I think we can take something from during Boozoo's section is when we have a close-up of Boozoo's head with empty eyes and mouth, and we hear heavy, almost panicked breathing, then a slight gasp before it is cut off. This, I feel, suggests that Charles maybe witnessed something he shouldn't have, and had to hide from someone who meant him harm as a result. Whether this was Bon again, or possibly someone in BSI is at the moment unknown. I also think, given the focus on the birthday party, that he maybe found his fate during a birthday party. Lastly, I feel that whoever killed Charles did something to his face when they killed him, as the last part of this segment has the photo of Charles with a blurred face and the subtitles which tell us that he cannot remember his face. Indeed, the 2 images of Charles we see during the Spot the Differences minigame shows Charles with missing eyes, a wide mouth probably as a result of a broken jaw, and covered in blood, which isn't exactly an uncommon thing for victims in this series. I just feel that Charles in particular having his face messed up either had it worse than the others, or his head and face played a significant part in the events of his death. Finally, we get to Char's game. reached at a point where the game seems to be on its last legs and barely holding together. While this game tells us about Rose's death, a lot of it we already knew. We knew that she'd been lured into the back room by someone telling her that they knew where Jack was, and we knew that she'd been dismembered into pieces. However, we do get a few extra little bits of information. Whoever told her that they knew where Jack was also said, "Follow me," so we could guess that she could maybe see this person to follow them, even though we know that the voice was coming from the backstage. It could be that whoever it was stuck their head out of the employee door we see when these words are displayed, purposefully luring her back there. Whether it was to get her attacked by Barn, or maybe because they genuinely knew what happened to Jack and wanted to tell her, though, is unknown. This does mean that there's a chance that my theory that it was Barn who called her back is untrue. We also now know that Barn possibly cornered her before murdering her, given the shadowy corner we do see during her death scene, and that she screamed. She screamed a lot. This probably means that alongside being killed on the day before Barn's Burgers closed, I was probably right about it being Rosemary's screams that everyone heard, and Hillary, Ashley and Kevin were discussing prior to entering K9 in Relocate Project's final clip. It also seems that Shar is still the one able to talk directly to Sophie, just as she did during her facility tour. Whether that's a consistent ability of hers or just the result of how broken the game was at that point, I don't know. Finally, the choice of hide and seek for Shar's game seems to be made to be an ironic twist on what Bond did with her body, hiding it inside of the animatronic Shar. It's only once Shar's able to come through that the game finally breaks, and Showbear can properly speak to Sophie, and help her remember the truth of that night. As it turns out, what Felix had been hiding turns out to matter a lot in the narrative we're being shown. We learn a lot about the other founder of Bunny Smiles Inc. in this video. So far we knew only that Felix was Jack's friend, that they'd had the dream of the restaurant for a long time, and that he was also married. We also knew that he had at least something to hide regarding Jack's disappearance, as my guess about him forging a signature about a fortnight after Jack was last seen was confirmed as a correct guess. In Bunnyfarm, however, we learned that Felix was a troubled man and prone to drinking an awful lot, possibly triggered by an unknown event that distressed him in 1964, as we see in the first of Linda's diary entries. This was something that worried his partner Linda, who tried for years to get Felix to admit that he had a problem with drinking and to do something about it. Besides that, it does seem like at first Felix and Linda had a pretty good relationship, and when she moved in with Felix he was said to be very happy about it. However, in the end she had to admit that Felix was not going to change, so she left him. This was at the beginning of the month of May 1974, and instead of giving Felix a wake-up call, it only seems to have made his problem worse as he tried to drown his sorrows regarding his breakup, as the fact that the video of him driving at night keeps going black seems to suggest that he was on the edge of being blackout drunk at the time. Ultimately, this led to the death of Jack and Rosemary's other two children, Ed and Molly. And it seems that this was the thing that finally got Felix to realise that Linda had been right and he had a problem. As I had thought, Felix does not seem to come across as an evil or greedy man, just someone who doesn't seem to know how to cope with his issues. He also seems slightly unorganised, as although Jack asked him to pick up the children to take them to the party at 5, Felix doesn't show up until 20 past 5, and although they need to be back by 9, Ed and Molly aren't able to find him to leave until between 37 and 53 minutes after this. This could easily be down to what else had happened that day though. This essentially recasts a lot of his future actions in a new light. As we know, the first clip of Relocate Project makes no mention of BSI having two founders and praises Felix quite heavily. While the thought that he wants people to forget Jack existed seems to still be true, the impression that came across from the praising was that Felix had a large ego, which might still kind of be true, but if anything it would be an act to cover for his own self-hatred. We don't know if by the time of the Relocate Project's launch if Felix is still drinking a lot, but if he managed to get help for his problem as a result of his mistakes, he might even be genuinely seen as a wonderful person by the community in BSI by the time of 1978. However, it does still have a touch of desperation about it, typical to the Felix we see presented in Bunnyfarm. I have a feeling that Felix is trying to save BSI in any way he can, to avoid having to lose yet another thing that is his, as he lost Linda, Jack, the Waltens and the original Bond's Burgers restaurant, if indeed the reopening went ahead as planned in 1982. We can also guess that his fear about what Jack would do kept him from telling his friend what had happened. Felix loved Ed and Molly, seems to consider the Waltens his closest family, and he loves his best friend Jack and doesn't want to lose him by admitting how badly he screwed up. As the voice from Lucky You said,
"He is so sorry about what he did to them, but there's nothing he can do. Remember that."
But this obviously leaves us with the open question of just how far he would go to avoid his mistakes seeing the light of day. But maybe someone wants his mistakes to be seen. The two accidental victims of the accident now combined into one body. Rocket. The community has long talked about the other two Walten children, and the common theory was, as I mentioned earlier, that Charles and Susan were those two children. We now know that that isn't the case, and it is the two new characters of Ed and Molly who were Sophie's siblings. We also learn why we've not yet heard them mentioned before. They died in an accident that was covered up, and Sophie began to take her pills seemingly as a result and forgot them. We have, however, seen them before, just not in forms we recognise as human. We first saw the two red figures at the end of footage, which again I know is no longer available. We also saw them next to a car in one of the wall pictures in the mysterious house, where I theorised that the car was connected to them and ended up being right. Even earlier than that though, there was the character I nicknamed Buddy, and we now know is called Rocket. While we've all wondered what part the Grey Rabbit, who was first seen at the end of the Walten Files' very first clip, was playing and who they might be bound to, I'm not sure many of us could have guessed the true story. Incidentally, all the pieces for this particular incident are pretty much offered to us in this video before Showbear shows Sophie the truth. Ed and Molly's spirits are now within the rabbit they named Rocket, built for them in 1970, and while we know that they've been trying to make contact with Sophie, I do wonder what their motive is right now. My reason for saying this is the message that they leave for Sophie on the statue's plaque shortly after Sophie enters the game for a second time. In it, they talk about how they can't really remember her, but then assure her that they'll soon be together forever and ever. While it's not a guarantee of malice, it certainly doesn't sound the most reassuring message that could be left. It almost sounds like they want Sophie to join them in their ghostly state so the three siblings can all be together again. This almost makes me wonder if the reason Rocket wants Sophie to remember is so that she comes looking for what remains of her family and can be put into a position where she does get to join them all and be with them forever and ever. However, I do feel that Rocket's main goal right now needs to just be to go home. The song used at the end of Guilty as they're on screen talks about going back home, and we know that the line Showbear uses is, "They didn't go home that night." So I feel like home is important to the children's souls that together make Rocket's consciousness right now. Whether that means finding their way back to the old Walten house or having all their family around them though, I don't know. My question though is, does Felix know that Rocket is Ed and Molly? Is that why he has the canine bunker in the same forest that he buried the children in? Did he put Rocket into the back doors, or did the rabbits sneak in there themselves? The fact that Ashley found them hanging off the wall does seem to lend itself more to the former idea. Update. Static, the VA for Showbear, has said that Rocket was taken home by Felix instead of being left in the forest with the children. So it's actually very likely that he did place Rocket there himself, or had someone on BSI do it. However, this doesn't necessarily confirm that Felix knows that Ed and Molly possess Rocket, or indeed that Rocket was possessed before coming to the canine bunker. And if Rocket was made for Ed and Molly, were they ever an actual character in the BSI universe? And if not, why are they on merchandise and why do they appear in that cartoon gang image? Was that just Rocket supernaturally appearing around Felix to let the man know, "We know what you did"? The other one of the pair that the community needs to consider the mysterious characters, we don't really learn an awful lot about Showbear and Bunnyfarm, although they play a significant role at the end. One thing I've noticed with Showbear is that they somehow seem connected with Sophie's memories. Remember that when the voice in Lucky You was repeating "Safety and pills, Sophie," their cartoony form was one of the images that showed up at the time. And here, in their distorted form, they are the key to unlocking Sophie's memory of her siblings and what happened to them that night on May 2nd, 1974. Something to point out though is that Showbear claims to deal with memories and helping you remember them. Yet when Sophie asks, "Who are you?" they have no answer. I think this might hint at Showbear's identity not being one that Sophie would remember, or maybe it's tied to something she hasn't forgotten but also hasn't connected to Showbear. They also refer to Felix at one point as Uncle Felix, in the same way Ed and Molly do. Whether that's just because that's how they think of him, or whether this hints at what or who Showbear is though, I'm not sure. They also emerge from a well, which might be based on this painting by Jean-Léon Gérôme, which you're more likely to know as Truth Coming Out of Her Well to Shame Mankind. And indeed, they emerge from their well to shame Felix. I also get that this probably isn't meant to be a reference to that painting or meme, but it's an interesting coincidence. But they leave us with a great many questions still unanswered. Who are they? What is their purpose and what is their connection to this story? How do they have their magic ability to recall repressed memories? Are they just a result of Sophie's pills? And like Rocket, were they a BSI character, and if not, how is a cutout of them in the K9 back doors? At the moment, we just don't have enough pieces to answer a lot of questions about them. Finally, to round off this load of theorising, I'd like to briefly discuss a few thoughts and things I noticed, but that don't really fit that well into any of the other topics. Firstly, the name of Chris occurs at least twice during this video. Once on the save file list, and again when Susan notes that one of the employees that left before her was named Chris. This isn't the first time we've heard of a BSI employee named Chris though, as when Brian first arrived at the K9 facility, he says that someone named Chris had told him that the facility hadn't been working since 1978. He was in the company in 1974 when Bob's Burgers was open, and seemed to still be in the company in 1982 to talk to Brian. He also seems to have been able to make a save file on the very Bunnyfarm cabinet Jenny and later Sophie played on. This makes me wonder if Chris is due to play a part in future releases of the Walten files, even as a minor part of the ongoing narrative. Speaking of Brian, like Susan before him, he also observed that Bon had a problem with one of his arms. But while Susan notes that Bon's right arm was stiff, Brian instead said it was the left. I'm not sure if this means much of anything or if Susan and Brian were just referring to the sides differently, i.e. one said right left from the animatronics point of view while the other meant it from their point of view. But does Bon's broken arm have something to do with how Jack perished though? We also see that there are two Bon character avatars in this game. The Bunnyfarm Bon is the character that the player controls, and we get to see that one most of all. But at the same time we also get the Hatless Bon, first seen hiding before making appearances when past deaths get depicted in the game. Then at the end the two Bons meet and the Hatless Bon allows the animatronic Bon to come through and show off his own horrific twitching animation. I think that this Hatless Bon is the real actual Bon reaching out through the game, and it seems like he isn't even able to reach out like this until way past the point of the game being broken, even though we see signs all the way through that Jack at least is watching. This seems to suggest to me that maybe out of all the animatronics, Bon might be the most restricted from actually speaking to Sophie. As I've speculated before, this could be down to the spirit bound to Bon having less control over what Bon is doing. Or maybe someone is controlling Bon outside of Jack, if indeed it is Jack bound to Bon. That's still not clear. One piece of evidence that could be used from this video to say that it is Jack is that both Bon and Char have very similar ending animations to their sections. Both standing there, both covered in blood, both with hands near or on their faces, both flailing or twitching violently. This seems to hint at there being that connection between the two, just as previous videos had made connections between the two as well. But speaking of connections, with the reveal of Susan and Charles seemingly not being Walten family, what is the purpose now of the tape list? We know that it has a list of the 4 people who were killed at Bob's Burgers in the order they died, but also includes Sophie's name at the end, twice if we count the little reversed bit too. We know it was dated June 11th, 1970 something. The absence of that last number makes it hard to know if it's just a list of people who had died, and Sophie for some unknown reason, or it was indeed a list made for a purpose on the very day Jack went missing. We also see that this footage is being recorded, but my question is, by who? How are they recording this? The recording bit of text also dips in and out as the video goes along, usually when the game is doing something spooky that it shouldn't be. This is probably best depicted when at the Bunnyfarm error screen. Recording is on screen up until the very frame that the no option changes to eyes, and comes back once it reverts. It vanishes for game cutscenes, whenever the true stories are being told to Sophie, and goes away completely after she starts Char's minigame. I fear that whoever was recording this footage might have been tied to BSI, might have been watching for signs of supernatural happenings, but the spirits combined seem to have managed to thwart their attempts to watch anything they had to tell Sophie this time around. And on the subject of BSI maybe hiding things and looking out for ways information might leak, Now that we know when all these people died, at least with dates, we now have a potential reason for why on the last day Bond's Burgers was open that the animatronic performers were nowhere to be seen. Depending on how late in the day of July 19th Rosemary was lured backstage, it could be that both Bond and Shaw were covered in Rosemary's blood as we see in Rosemary's death depiction from Shaw's facility tour. It could be that whoever the Shadow Man is, hid Bond and Shaw for this reason so as to hide what happened. And since Bond is the title character of the restaurant and Shaw a pretty popular character, the decision was made not to put on stage any of the animatronics that day with half of the performers missing. There also seems to be a very slight hint that Felix might indeed be the Shadow Man. The Spot the Differences images of Billy playing with his toys has 3 people and the car, just as we later see in the incident of May 2nd, 1974. While 2 of the toys are green and turn red though, the blue one in Billy's hand turns pure black. And later on we see that on that night, Felix was wearing all blue. It's a small thing, but Felix being the Shadow Man is certainly a theory that some in the community have had for a little while. I also realised after the fact that a number of images we saw in Commercial's deluge of images never ended up being used in this video. The one that comes to mind immediately is this one of Brian with that date underneath. However, I'm assuming this is down to the loss of some assets during the Great Loss of Christmas Eve 2020, and possibly some of it was planned for but scrapped during development. This is supported by an image of Brian's broken face being among a bunch of HD deleted scene images Martin shared on Twitter after the release of Bunnyfarm. Maybe we'll get more on Brian with the 4th video. There also seems to be another running theme throughout this video other than the recurring red I mentioned earlier. There seems to be a lot of emphasis on faces in this video. Billy's face turns into a black hole. Charles cannot remember his. Boozoo, the Hatless Bond and the Bunnyfarm Bond all lose their faces at some point. Shaw loses her eyes. Even some of the red faces in the bad ending sequence are faceless. While describing someone as faceless can mean they are boring and uninteresting, it's said to dream of a faceless person means to focus on a loss of identity, which would sum up Sophie's situation pretty well, both in that she couldn't remember the people who died and also her own loss of self by forgetting her past. However, it can also signify an inability to accept someone for how they are. Does this hint that Sophie maybe thinks highly of Felix, or did before the events of Bunnyfarm? And finally, for a bit of more far-reaching speculation, error code 0722. Does this mean that somehow a July 22nd date will end up being significant in the future? Martin did recently insert a little Easter egg into his 1st year anniversary image, which when brightened up shows us an image of Sophie with the date 07/30/1974. Does this mean that after Bond's Burgers closed on July 20th, something might have happened on the 22nd, and then on the 30th Sophie had this image taken and documented for some reason? Thanks to the Walten Files Discord for these images, by the way. I did not uncover this Easter egg first. And why is this significant? Could this be from a governmental agency who was trying to find a guardian for the teenager who is now without a family? Or is this from a medical place and shows the first day Sophie was put onto her pills? Also, as a little bonus, I think I now know what the 3rd door in the corridor of Shaw's facility tour is. The one she was prevented from telling us what it was used to hide. If you look at the way this corridor is shaped, it's 3 doors on a corner. I originally thought that the 3rd door might be this one at the bottom, as it usually makes sense to talk about things from the top down. However, if we look at the door for the back doors in Ashley's clip, we notice that the door to its right is not part of the same wall as that door, and even more importantly, there is this shelves cabinet to its left. Going back to the facility tour corridor, this suggests that this one at the top is the back doors door, and thus Shaw was prevented from talking about the back doors, which we later know hosts the Billy animatronic, the tape list, and with Bunnyfarm's revelations, Rocket. With that, we're done, for now. While we get some big pieces, the story of the Walten Files is still far from over. It's already been confirmed that there are going to be 6 official episodes of the Walten Files in this season, so Bunnyfarm is just our halfway point. Martin has just released a trailer for the entire season, which just contains some images and clips that haven't yet been seen, so we've already got some idea of what's to come. Most significantly, the Jack audio, which seems to suggest that at some point after the car accident, Jack managed to catch up to and confront Felix. It is worth noting that out of all the Walten File videos so far, Bunnyfarm is certainly the one that has the most rewatched bonuses when it comes to the central story of the videos. All the way through we get hints about Ed and Molly, see Rocket read about someone who was supposed to take care of two children that suggests that he didn't, see the image of two red figures next to a car, and see the sequence of events that led to Rocket becoming bound to two souls. The most important event to come out of this, though, is the development of Sophie's story. By mid-October of 1982, Sophie knows. And since we know Bon is after her, probably, I wonder if maybe that is why. Bon has been known to attack the people who discover things that they shouldn't know. There are still a great many questions that need answers. If Charles did see something that required him to flee, what was it? Did Jack or Rosemary ever find out what happened to Ed and Molly? How did Jack die, when and where? And what else is it that Sophie needs to remember? Does it have something to do with the day of June 11th, when Jack was last seen? And most confusingly, why hasn't Sci-05 seemingly left a comment yet?